The day after my son's funeral, a letter arrived, written in his handwriting, signed with his name. My hands trembled. The dead don't send mail, unless something's wrong. When Daniel died, the world lost color. The house we once filled with laughter turned hollow, a museum of echoes. People said time would heal, but they didn't see the way I still set his plate at dinner, the way I listened for his footsteps every dawn. Losing him was like losing the sound of my own heart. Clara, his wife, stood beside me during the funeral, her mascara running in careful streams, almost too careful. When she hugged me, she whispered, "He wanted you to move on." I wanted to believe her, but something in her voice, polished, practiced, sliced through the fog of grief. A week later, the letter came. It was sealed in cream stationery, with Daniel's familiar, uneven handwriting, the kind he used when he was tired but trying to make me smile. Inside, the first line hit like thunder. "Mom, if you're reading this, something went wrong. Don't trust Clara. Don't trust what they say about my accident." My knees gave way. I sank to the floor, clutching the letter as if it could pull him back. He was gone. I'd watched the casket lowered, felt the soil hit the lid. But his words, alive, urgent, terrified, they screamed otherwise. The next lines were more chilling. "There's a file in my office drawer. Bottom left. Blue folder marked Horizon. Don't let anyone see it, especially her." I froze. The only other person with keys to that office was Clara. That night, when the house creaked under the whisper of rain, I walked to Daniel's study. His chair still smelled faintly of cedar and aftershave. I unlocked the drawer, my fingers shaking. The blue folder was there, thin, unassuming, but humming with danger. Inside were flight itineraries, coded emails, and a photograph. Daniel standing beside a man I hadn't seen in over 30 years. Gabriel Martin? My first love. The man I left to marry Daniel's father. My heart pounded. Why would my son be meeting Gabriel? And why was Clara's name in one of the messages? Underlined twice in red ink? The last page in the folder was dated just 2 days before Daniel's death. It read, "They know. If anything happens to me, it's not an accident. Gabriel can explain?" My world fractured again. I needed to find Gabriel. But before I could, headlights flashed across the window. Clara's car. She wasn't supposed to be home yet. I barely had time to shove the folder beneath the loose floorboard before she stepped inside, her heels clicking like a countdown. She smiled that same rehearsed smile. "Can't sleep either, Margaret?" she asked softly. "Grief's a strange thing. It makes us see ghosts." I forced a nod, pretending calm, but my pulse betrayed me. She walked closer, her perfume too sweet, her eyes sharp as glass. "Funny thing," she said, tracing her fingers over Daniel's desk. "The police called today. They're closing the investigation. No foul play," she paused. "It's better this way, don't you think?" I couldn't answer. She leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "You're not planning to dig into things, are you?" That was when I knew she was scared. Not grieving, scared, and that meant Daniel had been right. That night, while she slept, I packed a small suitcase and retrieved the blue folder. The next morning, I bought a one-way ticket to Florence, Italy, the return address written in Daniel's letter. If Gabriel Martin held the answers, I'd find him. Even if it meant digging through the grave my son was never meant to lie in. As the plane soared over the Atlantic, I reread Daniel's letter under the dim cabin light. The ink was smudged in one corner, maybe by his tears, maybe by mine. Every word was a heartbeat calling me forward. But the truth I sought wasn't waiting in comfort. It was buried beneath decades of silence, betrayal, and choices I thought I'd buried with my youth. Somewhere in Florence, Gabriel Martin was alive, and so was the secret my son died for. Or rather, the secret he might have died to protect. The flight to Florence felt longer than time itself. The air inside the cabin was stale, but my heart pounded too loud to notice. Every vibration of the engine reminded me of how far I was running. From grief, from guilt, from the shadow of Clara's knowing smile. I tried to rest, But Daniel's face kept flickering behind my eyelids. That crooked grin, those restless eyes that always searched for meaning. He'd been everything his father wasn't. Gentle, curious, honest. And now the world told me he was gone. Yet here I was, chasing his ghost across the ocean because of one impossible letter. When the plane touched down in Florence, the sky was heavy with gray clouds that threatened rain. I rented a small car and drove through winding streets until I reached an old stone villa just outside the city. The address from the blue folder. The gate was locked, but I could see the garden inside, wild and overgrown. Somewhere wind chimes clinked softly, like a forgotten memory calling my name. "Gabriel," I whispered under my breath. "If you're here, show me." Before I could ring the bell, the door opened. And there he was. Time had etched itself across his face. More lines, silver hair, eyes dimmed yet fierce. But I would have known him anywhere. He froze when he saw me, his hand gripping the door frame as if to steady his world. "Margaret," he breathed. "After all these years? Why now?" I couldn't speak. My throat closed around every word I'd rehearsed. Finally, I held out the letter. "It's about Daniel," I said. "He's gone, Gabriel. And I think he died because of something connected to you." His expression shattered. He motioned for me to come in. The villa smelled of old books and rain-soaked wood. Paintings lined the walls, landscapes, portraits, moments caught in color. And there, above the fireplace, was a painting of a boy. Daniel. Gabriel turned away, his shoulders trembling. "He came to me 6 months ago," he said quietly. "He wanted to know who he was. The truth about his blood." I felt the room tilt. "You told him?" "I had to. He already suspected. He said Clara was digging into old family records. Something about inheritance, assets, controlling the estate after your husband's passing." Gabriel's voice broke. "He feared she'd discover the truth before you did." My knees weakened. "So he came to you. To protect me." Gabriel nodded. "He was trying to rewrite his will. To make sure what was yours stayed yours. But someone found out. He received threats. And then, his voice trailed off. "The accident," I whispered. Gabriel's eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't an accident, Margaret. I told him to go to the authorities, but he refused. He didn't want to drag your name through scandal. He said he'd handle it himself. The room seemed to close in around us." My chest ached with every breath. Then Gabriel opened a drawer and took out a small envelope, yellowed at the edges. "He left this with me. Told me to give it to you if something happened." I hesitated, then unfolded the paper. Daniel's handwriting again, shaky, rushed. "Mom, if you're reading this from Gabriel, it means they got to me. But don't stop. She'll try to sell everything, the patents, the company, to people who never knew what it stood for. I know who's behind it now. It's not just Clara, it's bigger. Follow the trail. Trust Gabriel." My fingers went numb. The letter slipped, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. Gabriel picked it up gently. "He loved you, Margaret. More than you'll ever know." Outside, thunder rumbled. The storm that had been brewing finally broke, rain hammering against the windows like fury itself. "Do you have proof?" I asked, voice shaking. Gabriel sighed. "Some. Enough to make enemies." He gestured to a leather-bound folder on his desk. "It's all here. Financial transfers, hidden accounts, everything Daniel was uncovering. But we're not safe now. If Clara suspects you came here—" "She already does," I said. "She's watching me." He looked at me with quiet terror. "Then she'll come." A crash sounded outside, the sharp echo of tires on gravel. Headlights flashed through the window. Gabriel's face paled. "They're here." He grabbed the folder and shoved it into my hands. "Take this. There's a safe house near Siena. Old farmhouse, red shutters. The key's in the kitchen drawer. Go, Gabriel, go," he shouted, pushing me toward the back door just as the front one burst open. Men stormed in. 3 of them, dressed in black, faces hidden. I ducked behind the hallway wall as Gabriel shouted something in Italian. A scuffle followed, furniture crashing, glass shattering. I ran through the kitchen, heart in my throat, rain soaking me as I fled into the dark countryside. Behind me, a gunshot split the night. Then silence. I wanted to turn back, to run to him. But his last words echoed in my mind. Go. I drove through the rain, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The folder lay on the seat beside me, its edges already damp. Inside it, I could feel the weight of Daniel's truth and Gabriel's sacrifice. When I finally reached the farmhouse, dawn was bleeding into the sky. My hand shook as I unlocked the door. The air smelled of dust and memories. I locked every window, every door, then collapsed against the wall. The folder clutched to my chest. For the first time since Daniel's death, I cried. Not soft tears, but the kind that ripped from the soul. Because I knew now that my son had died for something worth dying for. And I wasn't done fighting. The train hummed softly beneath us as the French countryside unfurled outside the window, a blur of golden fields and quiet villages resting under morning light. I sat across from Thomas, the man who had once been my everything, and for decades, my ghost. He looked older, yes, but in his eyes there was still that unshakable spark I remembered from when we were young. Yet there was something else too. Regret. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back gently. You faked your death, I whispered, my voice trembling. You left me with nothing but ashes and questions. Why? Thomas sighed, leaning back as if the weight of years pressed against his chest. Eleanor, I didn't want to. They came after me because of what I uncovered. I had no choice but to disappear. His tone cracked, raw and pleading. I thought I was protecting you. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Protecting me? By burying me alive in grief? Silence fell between us, heavy as the train wheels grinding over metal. I turned toward the window, blinking away the tears I refused to let him see. He watched me, his hand still hovering midair. Like he wasn't sure he had the right to touch me anymore. I died, Thomas, I said finally. Not my body, but everything inside me. For 40 years I lived like a shadow, loving a ghost who never loved me enough to stay. Thomas's jaw tightened, and his voice dropped to a whisper. You think I didn't love you? Eleanor, every day I breathed your name. But I couldn't come back until it was safe. I thought I'd lost you forever. I turned to him, anger flaring, but beneath it, something deeper began to stir. Hope, or maybe fear? The kind that comes when you realize the past might still have unfinished business. When the train stopped in Bordeaux, Thomas helped me down. The air smelled of old stone and lavender. Waiting by the car was Lucas, his friend, the one who had sent me that letter years ago, the one I never answered because I thought it was a cruel prank. Lucas embraced me with warmth that made me ache. He's been waiting for this day, Eleanor, he said softly. He never stopped searching for a way to tell you the truth. Truth. That word had been my tormentor for years. I didn't know if I wanted it anymore. We drove to the estate where it all began, the Beaumont Villa, the house that had held every dream Thomas and I once shared. As we arrived, my breath caught in my throat. It was as if time had stood still. The same iron gates, the same fountain cracked along the edges, the same oak tree where he once carved my initials beside his. Inside, the walls whispered our story. Photos still hung on the staircase, and in one frame I saw the young version of myself smiling beside him, so alive, so sure that love could survive anything. Why bring me here? I asked quietly. Thomas turned to face me. Because before we can begin again, you deserve to know everything. He led me into the library. Dust floated in the slanted sunlight like slow-falling snow. He opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of letters, bound by a faded blue ribbon. I wrote to you every year, he said. Lucas mailed some. Others I kept, hoping one day you'd read them. My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon. The first letter began, If you're reading this, it means I've failed to come back again. I skimmed through page after page, filled with apologies, confessions, and desperate love. By the fifth letter, my vision blurred. You kept these for 40 years? I couldn't destroy the only proof that I still existed, he murmured. But there's more. He handed me a photograph, a woman and a young boy standing beside him. That's my family, or what I thought I had to create to survive. A sharp pain twisted through my chest. You remarried? No, she was part of the cover. She helped me stay hidden. There was never anyone but you. His voice broke and his hand brushed against mine. Please, Eleanor. I need you to believe me. I looked at him then, truly looked, and for the first time saw not the man who had left me, but the man who had carried the same loneliness all these years. Tears filled my eyes, unbidden. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said softly. But I know I can't hate you either. He smiled faintly. That's a start. The sun dipped low outside the window, spilling amber light across the shelves. We sat there for hours, surrounded by the ghosts of our younger selves, talking until the world outside faded into twilight. When I finally stood to leave, he reached for me again, but this time I didn't pull away. My hand met his halfway, trembling, but real. For the first time in decades, silence didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning neither of us understood yet, but one we might finally be brave enough to face. The next morning, I woke to the sound of church bells echoing across the valley. Thomas had already left the villa, leaving a note on the table. Meet me at St. Clair at noon. There's something you need to see. The handwriting was unmistakable, steady, elegant, the same as the letters I used to trace with my fingers. My heart pounded as I dressed, the scent of the old house lingering like memory itself. When I arrived at the small chapel on the hill, Thomas was standing near the altar, holding a worn leather journal. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, scattering colors across his face. I found this after you left, he said. It belonged to Julian. My breath caught. Julian, the name that had haunted both of us. He was the man who betrayed Thomas, the man who ruined everything. Why would I want to see anything that belonged to him? Because it's not what you think, Thomas said quietly. Read it? Reluctantly, I opened the journal. Inside were entries filled with guilt and fear. They forced me to choose, betray him or lose everything. I never meant for her to suffer. The handwriting shook, uneven, desperate. He wasn't your enemy, Thomas continued. He was being blackmailed. When he tried to fix things, it was too late. They made it look like I was dead. My knees went weak. The world tilted. Everything I had believed, the betrayal, the rage, the pain, was built on lies crafted by people we never even knew. I spent years hating him, I whispered. And now he's gone. Thomas nodded, eyes glistening. We both lost decades to hate. We sat in the pews, the air heavy with incense and sorrow. I felt tears slide down my cheeks, not from anger this time, but release. For years I had been chained to a version of the past that never existed. I should have come back sooner, Thomas said, but I didn't know how to face you. Every letter I wrote felt like a lie if I couldn't hold your hand while you read it. I turned toward him, voice trembling. And yet, here you are, he smiled faintly. Maybe grace waited for us. Outside, the church bells tolled again, softer this time, as if blessing two souls who had finally stopped running. We walked through the graveyard behind the chapel. Rows of weathered stones whispered names lost to time. I stopped at one that bore Julian's name. Someone had placed fresh lilies there. Do you know who brings these? I asked. Thomas hesitated. His daughter. She still visits every year. His daughter? My voice broke. She's still alive? He nodded. And she's the reason I'm still here. She helped me find you. Shock rippled through me. All these years I had thought I was alone in my grief. But somewhere out there was another woman carrying the same burden, the same loss. Can I meet her? I asked quietly. Thomas's eyes softened. That's why I brought you here. At that moment, a figure approached from the path beyond the trees. A woman in her 30s, auburn hair tied back, eyes filled with the kind of pain only inherited through stories. Eleanor? She said softly. I nodded. You must be Clara, she smiled faintly. My father spoke of you in his last days. He said you were the one person he wished he could apologize to. Tears welled in my eyes. He didn't have to. None of us were free from what happened. Clara took my hand. Maybe now we all can be. The three of us stood there under the dying light, and for the first time in years, I felt peace stir somewhere deep within me, a fragile, trembling peace, but real nonetheless. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come in grand gestures. Sometimes it begins in silence, in standing side by side with those who once broke your heart, and realizing that maybe healing isn't about erasing the past, but about finally setting it free. When I woke the next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was pale gray, stretched thin like silk over the horizon. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the heaviness pressing on my chest. There was pain, yes. How could there not be? But beneath it, there was something new. Space. Space to breathe again. Thomas was already in the kitchen, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in his hand. His posture was quiet, thoughtful, as if the world had finally slowed enough for him to catch up to it. When he turned, he smiled at me, hesitant, almost boyish. "I didn't think I'd see the day you'd stand here again," he said softly. I poured myself a cup and sat at the table. Neither did I. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that lives between two people who've been through too much to need words. He broke it eventually. "Clara called this morning. She's coming for dinner. She found something she wants to show us." I felt a flicker of unease. "Does it have to do with Julian again?" "Maybe, she didn't say." He looked down, his fingers tightening around the mug. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together this time. Together." The word sat warm in the air between us. That afternoon, I wandered through the villa alone. The place was alive with memories, some soft, some cruel. I ran my hand along the banister, the same one I'd held as a young bride, trembling with joy. Every corner of this house had once echoed with laughter, music, and the scent of dreams. Now it held only the ghosts of what we were. I found myself in the small music room. The piano was still there, though its surface was scratched and dull. I lifted the cover and touched the keys. A single note filled the air, fragile, uncertain, like the beginning of something trying to be remembered. Thomas appeared at the door. "You still play?" "Not since you left," I said quietly. He stepped closer, voice low. "Then maybe it's time you played again." His words lingered long after he left. When Clara arrived that evening, she carried a small box wrapped in linen. Her eyes were rimmed red, as if she'd been crying. "I went through my father's belongings again," she said. "I found this hidden under the floorboards." She placed the box on the table. My hands trembled as I untied the string. Inside lay a stack of letters, their edges yellowed, tied with a ribbon I instantly recognized. "Blue satin?" "My ribbon," Thomas froze. "Where did you get these?" "They were written by you," Clara said, looking at him. "To Eleanor," I frowned. "Letters?" Thomas swallowed hard. "I wrote to you every month for 10 years after I disappeared. I mailed some through intermediaries. The rest, I thought, were lost." I picked one at random and unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably his. "Eleanor, if I ever see you again, tell me you haven't stopped walking by the sea. Tell me you still laugh when the wind catches your hair. I dream of you even when I try not to." My breath hitched. The paper blurred through my tears. "I never received a single one," I whispered. Clara nodded. "My father kept them. He said he wanted to protect you, but I think he couldn't bear the thought of losing both of you to the truth." Thomas lowered his head, his voice breaking. "He stole 10 years from us." I looked between them, one man gone, another standing before me, both caught in the web of choices made too long ago. "No," I said finally. "The years were stolen by fear, by silence. For a long while, none of us spoke. The only sound was the rain beginning again outside, soft, steady, cleansing." Clara reached into her bag and handed me a photograph. It was of Julian and Thomas together, smiling, standing on the deck of a boat. "They were friends once," she said. "My father never stopped regretting what happened. I stared at the image, my heart twisting. So much had been lost to pride, to misunderstanding, to the refusal to speak when it mattered most. Thomas touched the edge of the photograph. If he were here, I'd tell him I forgive him. Clara's voice trembled. Then say it now. He'll hear you. Thomas closed his eyes, whispering something too soft for me to catch. When he opened them, there was peace there, fragile, but real. After dinner, Clara left, promising to return the next day. The house fell silent again. I walked to the window and watched her car disappear into the mist. Thomas came up behind me, his voice low. I wish I could give you back those years. I turned, tears spilling freely now. And I wish I'd had the courage to believe you were still out there. We stood close, the years folding between us like paper. I felt his hand brush mine, tentative, uncertain. Do you still wear it? He asked. I blinked. Wear what? He smiled sadly. The ring I gave you. You never took it off back then. I lifted my hand, showing him the simple gold band still circling my finger, worn thin but unbroken. I thought about removing it, I said, my voice shaking. But I couldn't. It was all I had left that was still real. He exhaled, and for the first time in decades, I saw his eyes glisten. Then maybe, he whispered, it's time it meant something again. We stood there as thunder rolled softly over the valley. The world outside was changing, trees bending under rain, the night trembling with light. But inside that moment, I felt stillness. A quiet promise that perhaps, after all the storms, we had finally found our way back. Later, as I lay awake listening to the sound of rain, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't about erasing pain. It's about deciding that love matters more than the ruins it left behind. 40 years had been stolen from us. Yes. But in this fragile second chance, I found something even rarer. A peace that didn't ask to forget, only to begin again. And as the clock struck midnight, I whispered into the darkness, "We're still here." For the first time, those words didn't feel like a wound. They felt like a victory. The night air in Florence felt different, lighter, freer, almost holy. After the long flight and sleepless nights, Margaret stepped out of the taxi and stood before a quiet villa covered in ivy, the one Gabriel had written about in his letters. Her heart pounded so loud she could hear it echo in her ears. 40 years of silence, and now, here she was. The streets were lined with olive trees and old lanterns. In the distance, bells from Santa Maria del Fiore rang, slow and solemn. Margaret closed her eyes, clutching her purse where she kept the last unopened letter from Gabriel, the one he said would explain everything. But she hadn't read it, not yet. She wanted to look him in the eyes first, even if only through his ghost. A woman answered the door, maybe in her 40s, with warm brown eyes and a gentle Italian accent. "You must be Margaret," she said. "Gabriel told me, if you ever came, I should welcome you like family." Margaret froze. "He spoke about me?" The woman smiled. "Every spring. He said you were the woman who taught him forgiveness. That was too much." Margaret's knees weakened. Forgiveness? She had spent most of her life blaming him for taking Daniel away, for leaving her alone with pain and unanswered questions. The woman introduced herself as Lucia, Gabriel's niece. Inside, the villa smelled of lavender and old paper. Paintings leaned against the walls, portraits of people she didn't know, landscapes from southern France, and one unfinished canvas of a young woman by the sea. Margaret recognized her immediately. It was her, painted from memory. Lucia handed her tea and said softly, "Gabriel wanted you to have something." She opened an old wooden chest and pulled out a small stack of letters tied with a red ribbon. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Gabriel's. Margaret's hands trembled. He kept writing?" Lucia nodded. "He mailed them to your house, but they were all returned, unopened. He never stopped believing you'd forgive him one day." Tears blurred her vision. Margaret untied the ribbon and read the first letter aloud. "My dearest Margaret, I was not the man you thought I was. Nor was Daniel the boy you believed you'd lost. The truth is buried deeper than either of us can bear, but one day you'll see that love never left you. It only changed its shape. Margaret pressed the paper to her chest. Her voice broke. He knew. He knew about Daniel all along. Lucia looked at her gently. He said he saw Daniel once, years later, a young man with your eyes and his fire. He wanted to approach him, but feared reopening your wounds. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an old clock. Margaret sat for hours, reading one letter after another, words filled with remorse, confession, and a strange kind of love that time couldn't erase. She learned that Gabriel had discovered Amanda's deceit years before his death. He'd even hired an investigator who found proof of her betrayal. But before he could reach Margaret, his heart gave out. In his final letter, written only days before he passed, Gabriel had written, "If I die before the truth finds you, promise me one thing, don't let bitterness win. Love in its truest form is not something we understand. It's something that transforms us. I know you've suffered, but Margaret, your story isn't over. Find Daniel. Tell him who he really is. And forgive me." The words shattered her. For years, she had built her life around pain, anger, and loss. Now all of it began to crumble, revealing something else beneath, sorrow mixed with grace. Lucia touched her shoulder. "He wanted you to know. Daniel was never abandoned. He was saved." "Saved?" Margaret whispered. Lucia nodded. "By Gabriel. There was danger then. Amanda and her lover had tried to take the inheritance. Gabriel faked Daniel's death to protect him until the law could prove Amanda's crimes. But Daniel disappeared after Gabriel's own passing. No one knew where he went." Margaret stared out the window at the golden light spilling over the hills. Daniel alive. Gabriel gone. The world felt upside down again, but for the first time, her heart wasn't drowning. It was awakening. That night, Margaret stayed in the villa's guest room. She couldn't sleep. The moonlight spilled across the wooden floor, catching the edge of the letters beside her bed. She whispered into the quiet, "Gabriel, I forgive you. For the silence. For the years. For everything." A sudden breeze fluttered through the curtains, carrying the faint scent of olive blossoms. She smiled through tears. Maybe forgiveness didn't need an answer. Maybe it was the answer. At dawn, Lucia knocked softly and entered with a photo in hand. "Margaret, there's something else. Gabriel left this for you." It was an old photograph. Gabriel holding a young boy by the sea. The boy's face, unmistakable. Daniel. On the back, written in Gabriel's uneven script, "He still carries your heart. Find him in Tuscany." Margaret's pulse quickened. Tuscany, only 2 hours away. She folded the letters carefully, tucked the photo into her purse, and turned to Lucia. "Can you drive me there?" Lucia nodded without hesitation. "Of course. Gabriel wanted you to finish what he couldn't." As they set off toward the rolling hills of Tuscany, Margaret felt the first true sunlight she'd felt in decades warming her face. Somewhere beyond those olive groves, her son was alive, maybe lost, maybe angry, but alive. She gripped the photo tighter, her heart whispering, "This time, I won't lose him again." The road to Tuscany stretched before them like a painting, endless hills of gold and green, vineyards spilling across the horizon, and the air sweet with the scent of grapes ripening in the sun. Margaret sat in the passenger seat beside Lucia, her fingers tracing the edge of Gabriel's photograph. She'd stared at that boy's face 1,000 times already. Daniel. The same brown curls, the same dimpled chin. But if he was alive, why hadn't he come back? Why hadn't he found her? Lucia turned down the music and said softly, "You look like him, you know. When you smile." Margaret smiled faintly. "He was always my mirror. Every time I looked at him, I saw the best parts of myself, until the day I lost him." The road curved through olive groves and cypress trees. The closer they got to the small Tuscan town of Montefiorale, the heavier Margaret's chest felt. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the weight of unfinished love. They stopped at a small cafe where locals lingered over espresso and laughter. Lucia asked in Italian if anyone knew a man named Daniel Brooks, or Daniello Bruno, as the investigator's note had called him. An old man behind the counter perked up. "Ah, Daniello. The painter?" He pointed toward the far side of the village. "He lives near the vineyard. Quiet man. Keeps to himself. Paints faces of people long gone." Margaret's breath caught. Her son, a painter, just like Gabriel. They followed a narrow dirt road until the car could go no farther. Margaret stepped out, her shoes crunching on gravel, her heart racing faster with each step. At the edge of a vineyard stood a small stone cottage. Vines crept along the walls, and the window shutters were open, letting the warm light spill out. She hesitated by the gate, afraid the moment might vanish if she moved too quickly. "What if he doesn't remember me?" she whispered. Lucia smiled sadly. A mother's face is never forgotten. Margaret walked up the path, her knees trembling. She knocked on the door once softly. Then again, after a pause, footsteps echoed inside. The door opened. He stood there, older, broader, a beard framing his jaw, but those eyes... Those same eyes that once looked up at her from a crib. Daniel. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stared. Then, in a voice rough with disbelief, he said, "Who are you?" Margaret's breath broke. "Daniel, it's me. It's Mom," his brow furrowed. "My mother died 40 years ago." Tears blurred her sight. "No, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm real. I never stopped looking for you." He shook his head slowly, as if afraid to believe. "This can't be real." Gabriel said. He stopped mid-sentence, his jaw tightening. Margaret stepped forward. "Gabriel told you what he had to protect you. But I'm alive, Daniel. I've always been alive." He looked away, his voice low. "Then where were you when I needed you? When he was gone, when everything fell apart. I waited for you. You never came." Margaret's heart cracked. "I didn't know where you were. I thought you were dead." Silence filled the space between them. The only sound was the distant hum of bees in the vines. Finally, he stepped aside. "You'd better come in." The cottage was small but full of life. Canvases leaned against every wall, portraits of people Margaret didn't recognize, and some she did. One painting froze her in place. A woman by the sea, gray hair swept by wind, eyes filled with sorrow. It was her. "You painted me," she whispered. Daniel's voice softened. "You've been haunting me for years. I didn't even know if you were real or just memory." Margaret touched the canvas, her fingers trembling. "Memory kept us both alive." He turned away, pacing. "Gabriel told me you moved on. He said you wanted me to have a different life, far from the lies. He said the only way to save me was to disappear." Margaret shook her head. "He lied to protect you from Amanda and her lover. They tried to destroy everything, even your inheritance. Gabriel saved you, yes, but he never meant to take you from me forever." Daniel rubbed his temples. "He was sick before he died. He said he wanted to tell me something, but he never got the chance. After that, I stopped painting faces I knew." It hurt too much. Margaret walked closer, her voice trembling but steady. "Then start again. Paint this moment. Me, you, the truth." He looked at her then. Really looked. The anger in his eyes faded into confusion, and then into something deeper. He whispered, "Mom," and before she could breathe another word, he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him like a woman starved for air, her tears soaking his shirt. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, "for hating you, for believing the lies." She held his face between her palms. "You were a child. None of it was your fault." They stood there for what felt like eternity, two souls finally touching after a lifetime apart. When they finally pulled away, Daniel poured them both wine from a dusty bottle. He smiled faintly. Gabriel loved this vineyard. He said love was like wine. It takes time and a bit of heartbreak to become something worth drinking. Margaret laughed through her tears. He was right about that. They sat by the window as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Daniel showed her his paintings, his journals, his quiet life among the vines. For the first time in decades, Margaret felt at peace. But as the night deepened, Daniel said something that sent a chill down her spine. "There's one more thing you should know, Mom," he said quietly. Gabriel wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Margaret frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel took a small wooden box from a shelf and placed it between them. "Before he died, Gabriel gave me this. He said I'd know when to open it. I think, now is that time." Inside was a faded envelope sealed with wax. On it, in Gabriel's familiar handwriting, "For Margaret, when truth can finally heal." Margaret looked at her son, her hands trembling. "Shall we open it together?" Daniel nodded. Together. As the wax cracked under her thumb and the paper unfolded, Margaret felt the weight of 4 decades of lies pressing against her chest. About to break open like thunder, the wax seal cracked with a faint, almost reluctant sound, as if even time hesitated to reveal what had been kept hidden for so long. Margaret's fingers trembled as she unfolded the yellowed paper. The ink had bled slightly, but Gabriel's handwriting, slanted, passionate, unmistakably his, still carried the same gravity it always had. "Read it," Daniel whispered. "Please," Margaret nodded. She took a deep breath and began. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then the time I feared has come. The web I spun to keep you safe is unraveling. I must tell you what I never had the courage to say while we still had breath between us. Daniel is not who he believes he is, and neither are you." Margaret's heart stopped. The room seemed to tilt, the edges of her vision blurring. Daniel stared at her, his brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" Her voice faltered. I don't know." She continued reading, her throat tightening. "Years ago, when our love was still young and dangerous, you remember how your father forbade us to be together. He chose for you a man of power, Richard Brooks, the one who could give you a name, not love. I left, broken but determined. But when I discovered the truth, that you were carrying my child, I came back. Only to find you had already given birth and Richard had claimed the boy as his own." Daniel's eyes widened. "Wait!" Margaret froze, the words echoing in her mind like distant thunder. Her fingers tightened around the letter. Richard found out. He threatened to destroy everything. You, me, and the child. So I made a deal. I gave up my name, my life, and I swore never to come near you again. But I could not let him raise my son under his shadow. I took Daniel that night, changed his records, and made it look like he had been kidnapped. You never knew because he made sure you wouldn't remember. He dosed your tea that night. The night you thought you dreamed, the crying stopped." Margaret gasped, dropping the letter onto the table. The edges brushed against her trembling hands. Daniel's voice cracked. "So, all this time, you thought I died. And you didn't even know why." She looked at him, tears welling. "No, sweetheart. I didn't know. Richard, he made me forget. He took you from me in the worst way possible." Daniel stood, pacing across the room. His breath came sharp and fast. "And Gabriel? He was my real father?" Margaret nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "Yes. It explains everything. The art, the letters, your passion for truth. You're both so alike." He turned to the window, his shoulders tense. "Then why did he lie? Why let me believe I was alone all those years?" Margaret picked up the letter again. "When you read this, Daniel, know that I loved you beyond reason. I kept you hidden because I knew they would come for you, the same men who came for me. The Horizon Project wasn't just a business. It was a network, corruption buried deep. Richard wanted control, and he'd stop at nothing. If Margaret ever finds this letter, tell her the truth. I never stopped loving her. And I never stopped believing that love could still save us. Even if too late." The rest of the letter dissolved into a shaky signature, Gabriel's name, written as though he'd been in pain. Daniel sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Margaret knelt beside him, her voice trembling but strong. "We can still make this right. We can tell the truth," he shook his head. The truth destroyed him. It nearly destroyed you. If we open this again, it could destroy everything. Margaret reached out and cupped his cheek. No, darling. Hiding it already destroyed everything. Truth may hurt, but lies, they rot. For a long moment, the silence stretched between them, thick and unspoken. Then Daniel said, barely above a whisper, "There's more, isn't there?" "About Horizon?" She nodded. "The folder from your letter, the one I found back home. It mentioned Horizon, yes. Gabriel tried to expose them before he died. Richard's company was a front for laundering and blackmail. If the truth ever came out, the entire board would fall, including Clara's father." Daniel's eyes darkened. "So she married me to keep it hidden." Margaret swallowed hard. And when she realized Gabriel was alive, she silenced him. "That accident you thought was fate, it wasn't." She made sure of it. The words hung heavy in the air. Outside, thunder rumbled over the Tuscan hills, echoing the storm inside their hearts. Daniel rose, walking toward the window, watching the first drops of rain streak down the glass. "I remember flashes," he murmured. "A car crash, voices. Someone pulling me out before it exploded. I woke up in a hospital under another name. Gabriel told me I was safe, but he wouldn't tell me why. He said memory could kill me." Margaret stood, her voice steady now, the mother in her taking over. "You were never meant to live in hiding, Daniel. You deserve to live in truth, even if it burns." He turned to her, his eyes glistening. "And what about you, Mom? After all these years, what will truth give you?" She smiled sadly. "Maybe peace? Maybe forgiveness. Maybe just a chance to hold you in the light without shadows between us." The rain intensified, hammering against the roof like applause from heaven. Margaret picked up the letter, folded it carefully, and pressed it to her heart. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we go back. To America. We end this. We clear Gabriel's name, and we let Richard's empire fall, once and for all." Daniel nodded slowly, a new resolve hardening in his voice. "Then we do it together. No more secrets. No more ghosts." Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the vineyard in silver light. The vines swayed in the wind, whispering like old souls finally freed from silence. And for the first time in 40 years, Margaret didn't feel haunted. She felt alive. The flight from Florence to New York felt endless. Each hour in the air was heavy with everything left unsaid, all the years stolen, all the lies waiting to be unmasked. Daniel sat beside Margaret, his eyes fixed on the dark stretch of sky beyond the window. He barely spoke, lost in thoughts that seemed older than time itself. Margaret watched him quietly. He was a man now, scarred, thoughtful, cautious. But sometimes, when he tilted his head just so, she could still see the boy who used to run barefoot through summer rain, chasing lightning bugs and shouting her name. When the plane touched down, the city lights blinked below like embers from a dying fire. The familiar skyline, once comforting, now looked sharp and distant, like the jagged edges of a past she could no longer escape. "Home," Daniel murmured, almost bitterly. "If that word still means anything," Margaret squeezed his hand. "We'll make it mean something again." At customs, Margaret's heart raced when the officer scanned their passports. For a moment, she feared Daniel's assumed identity might trigger an alert. But after a brief pause, the man stamped them both through with a bored sigh. As they stepped outside, the cold New York air hit them like a slap. Brisk, unwelcoming, alive. A lifetime had passed since Margaret last stood here as a mother with hope in her heart. Now she stood as a woman armed with truth, fragile but fierce. They took a taxi to her old neighborhood in Westchester, where autumn leaves swirled like forgotten memories. The house was still there, the white porch, the oak tree Daniel used to climb, the same window she used to wait by every night after he was taken, but someone else lived there now. Margaret stood at the gate, her throat tightening. "This was where I prayed for you," she whispered. Daniel looked around slowly. "I remember pieces. The tree, the swing, the smell of rain on the driveway." He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his face. I used to dream of this place. I thought it wasn't real. They didn't go inside. Some ghosts were better left outside the door. Instead, they drove to the small safe house Gabriel once owned in Brooklyn, a weathered apartment above an old bookstore. The key still fit. Inside, everything smelled of dust and ink, but the walls were lined with Gabriel's notes and sketches. "This is where he planned it," Daniel said, scanning the walls. "His investigation. His evidence against Horizon," Margaret nodded. "Then this is where we'll finish what he started." They spent hours sorting through the papers, coded files, receipts, offshore accounts. Gabriel had documented everything, but the final piece was missing. The one file that could tie Richard Brooks directly to Horizon's crimes. Margaret frowned. "It's not here. He must have hidden it somewhere else." Daniel turned one of the canvases over. On the back, scrawled faintly in charcoal, were the words, "Truth sleeps beneath the water." Margaret stared at it. "The lake house," she breathed. "In Maine." Daniel looked at her sharply. "You think that's where it is?" "I know it." They drove through the night. The highway unfurled before them like a ribbon of ghosts, every mile taking them closer to the place where everything began, and where perhaps it would finally end. By dawn, they reached the old lake house. The wooden porch creaked under their steps, and the air smelled of pine and salt. The shutters were closed, but the lock was broken, as if someone had been there recently. Margaret's pulse quickened. She pushed the door open. Inside, everything was covered in dust, except for one thing: the fireplace mantel. There, a photo sat upright, recently wiped clean. It was of Richard Brooks smiling beside Clara. Daniel's jaw tightened. She's been here. They searched the house in silence. The floorboards groaned under their feet. Margaret went to the study, Gabriel's old writing room. In the corner, beneath the window, was a small wooden chest. She knelt, fingers trembling, and lifted the lid. Inside lay a flash drive sealed in plastic, along with a folded note. "For the one who survives long enough to tell the truth." Margaret handed it to Daniel. "This is it." He nodded, slipping it into his pocket. "Then let's go before a noise outside." The crunch of gravel. Margaret froze. Daniel glanced toward the window. Headlights. "Too late," he whispered. Clara's car. The door creaked open, and her voice floated in like silk dipped in venom. "Well, isn't this a touching family reunion?" She stepped inside, her hair perfect, her smile sharp. Behind her were two men in dark coats, the same kind Margaret had seen outside her house months ago. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "You tried to kill me once. You won't get another chance." Clara laughed softly. "Kill you?" "Oh, Daniel, I saved you. I gave you a new name, a new life. You should thank me." Margaret stepped forward, her voice calm but cold. "You stole everything from him, from me. You made my son think he was dead." Clara's eyes flicked to the drive in Daniel's hand. "That belongs to Horizon. Hand it over, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Daniel's voice was steel. "You'll have to kill me first." One of the men reached inside his coat. Margaret didn't think. She grabbed the old poker from beside the fireplace and swung. The sound of metal on bone cracked through the room. The man fell, groaning. "Run!" she shouted. Daniel pulled her toward the back door. Clara screamed behind them. "You don't know what you're doing. That drive will burn everything." "Good!" Daniel shouted back. "Then let it burn." They burst into the cold morning air, racing through the trees toward the car. The engine roared to life just as gunfire split the silence. Margaret ducked, heart hammering, as a bullet shattered the rearview mirror. Daniel floored the gas. The lake reflected the rising sun, gold over crimson, as they sped away from the house that had once promised love, and now reeked of betrayal. Neither of them spoke until the road widened into the main highway. Finally, Daniel exhaled shakily. "You okay?" Margaret nodded, clutching the flash drive. "We've got what we came for." He glanced at her. "Then we end this. Tonight." And in that moment, with the morning light breaking through the storm clouds, Margaret realized something she hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Morning light seeped through the cracks in the curtains, spilling golden warmth onto the floorboards of that quiet French room. I woke to the faint sound of the bells from the village below, echoing through the hills like an invitation to peace I wasn't sure I deserved. For a moment, I forgot where I was, until the scent of strong coffee and lavender soap reminded me. I was in Beaumont again, the castle of memories, the fortress of everything I'd run from. When I stepped outside, Pierre was already in the garden, his sleeves rolled up, tending to a patch of roses that had somehow survived the years. He turned, his face lined but kind, the same warmth that had once made me believe in forever. "You're up early," he said softly. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Too many ghosts," he smiled faintly, handing me a cup. "Then let's wake the living." For a while we said nothing. Just the sound of the wind brushing through the vines, the clinking of cups, and the distant hum of bees. It was peaceful, dangerously so. Because peace, I'd learned, always comes before the storm. Pierre looked at me suddenly, his gaze searching. "Eleanor." Richard's death, his disappearance, it wasn't just to expose Amanda. "It was to save you," I froze. "Save me from what?" "From becoming her," he said simply. "From losing yourself to vengeance." His words pierced through me like a quiet truth I hadn't wanted to hear. For years I'd carried hate like armor, convincing myself that justice meant destroying those who hurt me. But maybe Pierre was right. Maybe hate had been the real thief all along. Later that afternoon, Richard found us near the old fountain. He walked slowly, each step weighted with memory. "I spoke to Julian," he said, voice low. "He's agreed to turn himself in. Amanda's hiding somewhere in Spain, but she won't last long. The law will find her." Pierre nodded, calm. I just stood there, feeling a strange mix of victory and sorrow. I'd dreamed of this moment for decades, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt hollow. That night, I found myself walking alone through the halls of the chateau, tracing my fingers along the stone walls that had once held our laughter. I ended up in the old chapel, the one I used to avoid because it reminded me of promises broken. Candles still lined the altar, dust-covered but intact. I lit one, whispering a prayer I hadn't said in 40 years. "Lord," I said quietly, "I've carried bitterness longer than I've carried love. Teach me how to let it go." Tears fell silently. For the first time, I didn't try to wipe them away. They weren't weakness anymore. They were release. When I turned around, Richard was standing in the doorway. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he murmured. "You didn't," I whispered back. "You're part of the prayer." He smiled sadly and stepped closer. "Eleanor, I don't expect forgiveness. What I did, vanishing, letting you believe I was dead, was cruel. I thought I was protecting you, but I only deepened your wounds." I looked up at him, his face older but still so painfully familiar. "You broke me," I said, "but you also gave me a reason to rebuild." He reached for my hand, hesitant, as if afraid I'd pull away. I didn't. "We can't rewrite what happened," he said, "but maybe we can finish what was left undone." For a moment, I saw it, the life we could have had if lies hadn't tangled our path. But life isn't built on what-ifs. It's built on what now. The next morning, we visited the village square. News had spread. People whispered about the return of the lost couple of Beaumont. Some smiled kindly. Others pitied us. I didn't care. For the first time in decades, I wasn't running. We stopped by the old bakery where I used to sell sketches for a few francs. The baker's wife, gray-haired and gentle, recognized me instantly. "You came home," she said. "After all these years?" "I did," I said softly. "And this time, I'm staying." That evening, as the sun sank behind the vineyards, painting the world in shades of fire and honey, Richard, Pierre, and I shared dinner beneath the olive trees. No grand speeches, no rehearsed apologies, just laughter, memories, and the quiet rhythm of healing. At one point, Pierre lifted his glass. "To second chances," he said. Richard added, "and to the courage it takes to forgive." I looked between them, two men who had loved me in different ways, both flawed, both human. I raised my glass last. To Grace, I said. Because without it, we'd still be lost. The night fell gently around us. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale sang. The vineyard glowed under the moonlight, each leaf shimmering like it was dipped in silver. I leaned back, closing my eyes. For the first time, the silence didn't ache. It didn't carry the ghosts of the past, only the echo of peace finding its way home. Tomorrow would bring more truths, more healing, maybe even more pain. But tonight was enough. Because forgiveness, I realized, isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a new one. The next morning began with a chill that seemed to crawl straight through the stone walls. A thin fog blanketed the vineyard, ghostly and pale, like the world itself was holding its breath. I stood by the window, a shawl around my shoulders, watching the mist coil over the fields like secrets too stubborn to fade. Pierre had gone to the market. Richard was still asleep downstairs in the library. The fire burned low beside him. The house felt still, until a knock shattered the quiet. I opened the door to find a young postman holding a weathered envelope. "For Madame Eleanor Beaumont," he said, mispronouncing my name in the charming French way that softened its edges. The handwriting on the envelope stopped my breath. It was familiar, elegant, cold. It was Amanda's. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges. Her words were written in ink that looked like it had been pressed down too hard, as if every letter was carved from anger itself. "Eleanor, you think you've won. That exposing me, taking back your husband, makes you righteous. But you never knew the truth. You never asked why Richard left you. You only blamed me. I never needed to destroy you. You were already destroying yourself. He stayed with me because you wouldn't listen. You built walls, not bridges. The night he disappeared, I told him to go. Not for me, but for you. He wanted you to live free of him, of guilt, of the lies he couldn't confess. You think you know betrayal, but you never saw your own reflection clearly. Amanda." I sank into the nearest chair, the letter trembling in my hands. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Guilt pressed into my chest like a stone. Could it be true? Had I been so blinded by my pain that I'd rewritten history to make myself the victim? The sound of footsteps pulled me back. Richard entered quietly, coffee in hand, his expression soft when he saw my tears. "Eleanor? What is it?" I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, jaw tightening. When he finished, he didn't speak right away. He just stared at the page, as if it contained a ghost only he could see. "She's twisting the truth," he said finally, voice heavy. Amanda always knew where to strike, but she isn't entirely wrong. I looked up startled. "What do you mean?" He set the letter on the table, his hands trembling slightly. "The night before I disappeared, we fought. You accused me of things I hadn't done, and I didn't defend myself. I was tired, Eleanor. Tired of the silence, the distance between us." Amanda offered a way out. Not love, not passion. Just escape. And I took it. His words cut deeper than I expected. "You could have stayed," I whispered. "We could have fixed it," he nodded. "Yes, but I was a coward. And in my shame, I thought leaving would somehow set you free. I thought if I vanished, you'd move on and find peace." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Peace? I built my life around your ghost, Richard." "There was no peace, only ashes," he flinched. "I know. And I'll carry that guilt forever." The room went quiet except for the crackle of the fire. I looked at him, this man who had once been my whole world. 40 years had carved lines into his face, but his eyes, those same gray eyes, still held the truth of who he was. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said softly, "but I don't hate you anymore. Maybe that's a start." He nodded, eyes glistening. "That's more than I deserve." The letter lay between us like a scar, visible, undeniable, but no longer bleeding. I folded it gently and placed it in the drawer of the desk. "Let it rest," I said. "The dead have had enough of our tears." Later that day, I walked alone down to the river that ran behind the chateau. The air was crisp, the water reflecting the pale sky. I knelt beside the edge, dipping my fingers into the cold current. It was time to let the past wash away. Pierre found me there, carrying a small wooden box. "I thought you might want to see this," he said. Inside were old photographs. Me, Richard, Amanda, all smiling at a party long ago. "We were young," he said softly. "And foolish. But not evil." I took one photo in my hand. Amanda stood beside me, her arm around my waist. We looked like friends. Sisters almost. For a moment, I remembered the laughter before everything broke. "She loved him too," I said quietly. Pierre nodded, and she hated herself for it. I closed the box, breathing deeply. "Maybe forgiveness isn't about who was right or wrong," I said. "Maybe it's just about setting ourselves free from what we can't change." Pierre smiled gently. "Then perhaps you've finally found peace, mon ami." That evening, I sat on the terrace as the sun dipped low, turning the sky to gold. Richard joined me, carrying 2 glasses of wine. He handed me one, his hand brushing mine. "To the truth," he said. I looked at him, then out at the horizon. "To letting it go," I replied. We drank in silence, the kind that no longer hurt. The vineyard stretched out before us, endless and forgiving. Somewhere in that vast quiet, I felt Amanda's presence. Not as an enemy, but as a memory. A piece of the story that had shaped us all, and for the first time, I whispered a prayer for her too. Because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift for the guilty. It was a release for the broken. The final morning in Beaumont came wrapped in sunlight. It spilled through the curtains, golden and kind, touching everything like a quiet benediction. The chateau, once a prison of memories, now felt like a living heart again, beating softly with forgiveness, with peace. I walked through its corridors one last time, my fingertips brushing the walls as if saying goodbye to every echo that had once haunted them. In the dining room, Richard sat at the table, glasses and plates cleared, a single envelope resting beside his hand. He looked up when he saw me. "It's from the notary," he said. "I'm finalizing the papers. The estate will go to you and Pierre," I frowned. "Richard," he lifted a hand. "It's not charity. It's closure. Everything that began here should end in your hands. You were the soul of this place, Eleanor." His words struck deep. For so long, I had believed that love only destroyed, that it burned everything it touched. But maybe love, when purified by truth, could rebuild even what was lost. Pierre entered then, carrying a basket of grapes fresh from the vines. "Harvest is good this year," he said cheerfully. "The land is healing," I smiled. "So are we." We spent that day together. 3 souls who had seen too much, and yet still found laughter in the quiet moments. When evening came, we walked to the hill that overlooked the valley. From there the world stretched endlessly, the vines, the rivers, the little village where bells were beginning to ring for Sunday Mass. Richard's voice broke the silence. "You know," he said, "I used to think forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened. But it's the opposite. It's remembering and choosing love anyway." Pierre nodded. "Yes. Love that endures even when it's bruised. That's the kind that saves." I watched the sunset paint the sky in amber and rose, and I felt tears gather in my eyes, not from pain, but gratitude. "I spent years thinking love had abandoned me," I whispered. "But love was never gone. It was just waiting for me to stop running." We stood there until the light faded. Then, one by one, we walked back down the hill, toward the warmth of home, toward the life that still waited. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something inside me stirred, a call, a need to speak. So I sat by the old writing desk, lit a candle, and began to write a letter. To anyone who has loved and lost, I once believed pain was proof that love had failed. But pain is not failure, it's a teacher. It reminds us that we were brave enough to feel, to hope, to give ourselves away. Time will test you. People will break you. But if you keep your heart open, love will find its way back. Maybe not in the way you expect, but always in the way you need. Forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you do. Let go, not to forget, but to finally breathe again. And when the chance comes to love again, take it. Even if it scares you. When I finished, I sealed the letter and left it on the windowsill, letting the candle burn low beside it. The flame flickered, warm and steady, like the heartbeat of something newly reborn. The next morning, Richard and Pierre were already outside, loading the car. We were leaving Beaumont for good. As I took one last look at the chateau, the air shimmered with birdsong and light. It no longer looked haunted. It looked alive. Richard turned to me, smiling softly. "Ready?" I nodded. "More than ever." We drove toward the horizon, the sun climbing higher, scattering gold across the road ahead. The past followed us quietly, not as a shadow, but as a reminder that even the darkest stories can lead to dawn. And that's the truth I carry now. Life doesn't give you perfect endings. It gives you second chances, hidden in the wreckage, disguised as pain, offered through grace. Forgiveness is not weakness. It's the courage to choose peace over pride. Love doesn't erase scars. It teaches us how to wear them as proof we survived. If you're watching this, maybe you've been hurt too. Maybe someone betrayed you, abandoned you, or made you believe your story was over. But listen closely, it's not. You are not defined by what broke you, but by how you rise again. Don't let bitterness steal your tomorrow. Don't let shame silence your healing. There's still love waiting. In new faces, in quiet mornings, in the mirror staring back at you. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that you're never too old to begin again. To forgive, to rebuild, to love because grace still finds us, even in ruins, especially in ruins. So if you believe that love can still heal, that broken things can still be made beautiful, stay with us. There are more stories to tell, more hearts to mend, more light to chase. Click subscribe, share this story, and walk with us into the next one, where hope is real, love never ends, and forgiveness is the doorway home.